So this week we're talking about blended learning, which is definitely an exciting thing to be talking about. As everybody knows, a blender, you put liquids in, has different speeds, has an off button, but that's not exactly what we're talking about with our blended learning. Um, so looking at the question from Kuros there, what opportunities are you providing for informal learning, exploration, and play with new technologies in your organization, class, school, or workplace? Some of the stuff that I have in my classroom, I have 3D printers right off on the side of my classroom that I have students go over there and they'll design things and then they'll print them. Students know that they're open whenever they want, so there's not really any formal um, time for them to do that. Instead, they just come and do it whenever. Definitely, though, I would like to look at working that into my classes a little bit more, how to use 3D printers and just the use of them. Also, like things like Desmos. Students are constantly using that, not only for the math in the class, but also just for other stuff, for graphing. And then just programming in general. Over the years, I've had many students take it upon themselves to learn how to do different types of programming, and I've always been somebody who has supported them, so they know that it's something that they can come to me and ask about, whether it's programming through Excel documents, Python, or just other programming, C++, Java, whatever. They know that they can come to me and ask questions, and even though I'm not a awesome programmer, I still know enough of the basics that I can help them. So those are some stuff that I do in my classroom for informal learning and play with new technology. So what I already understand about blended learning, a lot of it, you have some work that's done online, some that's done face-to-face. So last week we were looking at flipped classroom. So flipped classroom is a specific type of blended learning where you do a lot of the videos outside of class and the content delivery outside of class and then the practice inside of class. So blended learning, certainly flipped classes are part of that. But blended learning is a lot more than just that. A lot of times, if you're using it correctly, it can increase your engagement. It can increase engagement and the amount of time that you have in your class, because you'll be able to work with students in smaller groups while the other students are working in other stuff. And then there are many different types of blended learning. So as I mentioned before, the flipped classroom is one type of blended learning, but there's a whole bunch of different modalities for blended learning. And there's a whole bunch of different levels to blended learning. So definition from the Christensen Institute said that blended learning is a formal education program in which a student learns, at least in part through online learning, with some elements of student control over time, place, path, and or pace. So there's that online part. And then at least in part with a supervised brick and mortar location away from home. So there's that face-to-face part. So it's this blend between those two, the online and the face-to-face, so that both those aspects are working together. And as you can see, the modalities along each student's learning path within a course or subject are connected to provide an integrated learning experience. So it's not just using an online program and then having a lecture and going on from there. The things have to really blend together and they have to work with each other and support each other and support the student learning. So there are a bunch of different types of blended learning, as we saw this week. Station rotation, where the students rotate through those stations. They have a fixed schedule, and then at least one of those stations is online or uses technology in some manner. And then there's a couple different versions of that, like the individual rotation, where the students rotate through those stations, but they're more on an individual basis. So you can individualize the learning a lot more. You had lab rotation, which is, again, similar to the station rotation, but this time the online station is in a designated computer lab. I would find that hard to do at my level because at the high school level, we don't have a set computer lab. But we do have, all the students do have a Chromebook, so I could still have a section of the class set up for that. A la carte, they work through Curriculum Online. They have an online teacher of record. You have a flex where students work on a very fluid schedule. Depends on their needs. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, you have the flipped classroom. So there's a whole bunch of different types of blended learning. They all have different pros and cons to them. And again, depending on the situation, you might find one type to be better than the other types. A lot of these, or some of these at least, have the need for a second person in the classroom in order to monitor, which isn't something that I would have in my class per se at the high school level, but definitely at the lower level at times you would have that. So that's one part of blended learning that could be difficult if you don't have that other person to monitor, because if you're working with a small group, you can't exactly always keep track of the other groups as well. So using my classroom, there's three major components I could see, or three major programs that I could see to help me use more blended learning. Khan Academy is kind of the freebie for math, and also I'd say for a lot of science and becoming a lot of just general education. So Khan Academy has a lot of practice examples for students to do. It has a lot of videos they can watch to help their learning. And it can be very individualized for that student. And it can look at highlighting the things the student really needs to focus on. Google Classroom I see as a fantastic what's the word I'm looking for there? A fantastic program in order to just kind of keep all the students on in the same area so that they know what they need to work on, so that they know what comes next, and just as a good way of communicating with them. So Google Classroom I could definitely see using in a flipped classroom or just in a blended classroom as well. And then also Flipgrid is another good program I could see using in a blended classroom. In fact, it's one that I would like to use a little bit more in my classes, where you have students shoot short videos where they explain a topic, and then other students can also respond to their videos with their own videos. And they're all really short videos, and with students have, majority of the students have smartphones, they can use those. But also the Chromebooks that all our students have, they can use to shoot those videos and upload them. So that's one of the things I'd look at using. So when I thought about how could I incorporate this into my classroom, what aspects of it would I want to use, I immediately started thinking about using in calculus. And specifically when we start talking about continuity. So continuity in calculus is a very specific thing. The objective I'd have there is to justify conclusions about continuity at a point using the definition, which again is a very specific objective, because in calculus we start looking at very specific things like that. The essential knowledge that the students need to take away is that a function f is continuous at x equals c, provided that these three things happen. F of c exists, the limit as x approaches c of f of x exists, and the limit as x approaches c if f of x equals f of c. So those are three very concrete things that they have to have knowledge about. So before this lesson, of course, we'd have to talk about what are functions. We have to make sure students understand what they are. They have to know how to evaluate a function, and they have to know how to evaluate limits of a function, which are all things that would be covered previously. So the students in the class are juniors or seniors in high school, and it is an elective course, so they do have that drive, the want to be in the class that you sometimes don't always get. And immediately I started thinking, if I'm going to do this class as a blended class, or this lesson here, I'd want to use a station rotation sort of thing, where I have different stations in the classroom in order to help build the students' knowledge. So I have these different stations. The very first station, I have a short video on limits and the definition of continuity. So to describe what does it mean to be continuous, I'd go over those criteria and it'll talk a little bit about how to check those criteria. And then a second station, after they finish that first one and take some notes on that, would be to work on Khan Academy on some specific examples that show the different types of discontinuities. And as you can see in the picture over there, sometimes you get graphs and that ask you, where is this discontinuous, or it asks, is it continuous at these points? And the student would have to answer accordingly. And then finally, I like to have students do a Flipgrid station where students would discuss examples and respond to each other. So on chart paper or poster paper, I would have up an example with a question about that problem. And then students would have to discuss that problem and their solution, and then they'd be able to have a chance to respond to each other. So students would work through these different stations here. And at the final station, after they've recorded their own video, they'd have to go back and record comments and concerns about other students' videos in the class as well. So I could use that as a homework or an out-of-class part, that last part there, where everything else could happen in the classroom in order to help build students' understanding of discontinuity. It's a lesson I'd like to do like this because discontinuity is one of those topics that I find myself lecturing on throughout the years. Seems like every year I do it, I always end up having a lecture, and it's a topic that students sometimes struggle with. They struggle making this connection that all three of those parts need to happen in order for a function to be continuous, and if any of those fails, then it's discontinuous. So definitely it's a topic that I think a blended learning approach to it would help support student learning and support their understanding of continuity. Which plays a huge part when we start talking about differentiation and is a function differentiable. One of the cool things with Khan Academy is that it's very much connected with Google Classrooms now. And Google Classroom is a program that I started using this year, and I'd like to continue to use as we move forward. But Khan Academy has taken the step and they've actually linked themselves with Google Classroom. So if you're looking at different things in Khan Academy, you can actually assign them right to your Google Classroom. Just by clicking that Google Classroom button right there, then it'll ask you which class would you like to share this with. So you can assign stuff through Khan Academy or on Khan Academy through Google Classroom, which is a really cool connection there. So these programs are starting to really interconnect with each other, which will make our work as teachers to create blended or online learning a whole lot easier. A couple key thoughts that I took away from a lot of our readings this week. The first one was start small. Don't try to blend your entire curriculum. Start small with a specific example like we did in this class. How could I blend this lesson? And in fact, ask yourself, does it make sense to blend this lesson? Because it doesn't always. Sometimes lessons aren't going to be blended, and that's fine. They'll be all face-to-face. Like I'm thinking about some examples with trigonometry. There's a lot of times I like to bring the class outside, measure angles of elevation, and use those to determine the height of hard-to-measure objects, such as the school water tower, trees and lampposts, those sort of things. So that doesn't really make sense to do that as a blended learning because you can have that real-world experience. Have a goal. So in this lesson, I have a very specific outcome I'm looking for. Can you improve stuff by switching to blended or not? And finally, have access to the materials and have access to the online components. Those are key things you need for blended learning. One of the big questions I really liked that the Christensen Institute asks, many in the field pose the question, does blended learning work? And the truth is that, truth for that is the same thing for any type of learning thing that you're doing in class, is that it really depends on the particular problem, the particular students, and the particular class you have. Not one strategy is going to always work. So here's my works cited, and then thank you. I look forward to your input in the lesson I outlined there.